not? Why not? Thank you, Ollie. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Very good and very privileged to have Andrew Morris with us this morning. And I'm going to ask Andrew a few questions about leadership, entrepreneurship, and growing businesses in a moment. Andrew has a very distinguished entrepreneurial and leadership past. He was a co-owner and grower of the Business Design Centre, which he advanced, improved, and made a very considerable institution, which is still successful and still very much in many people's lives. After that, with an institutional investor, he bought Earl's Court and Olympia and turned them into something much better than they had ever been, outshone a lot of the other venues in the UK, and moved it on very successfully in a very profitable and good sale, which enabled it to continue. Andrew's career then changed a little as he became the employed chief executive of the National Exhibition Centre near Birmingham. And I think, I don't know if it was Andrew, but somebody cleverly characterized his leadership of that as turning it from council to commercial, which is always rather difficult when you take something which is run by a local authority and turn it into something that is vibrant and profitable and contributory. After that, Andrew acquired and ran the Academy for Chief Executive, which helps leading chief executives and business leaders improve themselves and their businesses. And it was about 5 years ago when Andrew was in that role that I first met him, actually, because I was interested in becoming a chairman of Academy for Chief Executives group. And so I was interviewed by Andrew, which was a very pleasurable experience. And amazingly enough, I was actually hired to do that job. And I suppose that's one of the few occasions when in Andrew's stellar career that people might have questioned his judgment. But it's marvelous to have him here with us today. Andrew, in a very varied life of successful entrepreneurship, interesting startups, and advice and knowledge of leadership, did you have a career plan, or did you just sort of grab opportunities as they came your way?
Probably more of the latter, Harry. I remember when I was doing my GCSEs, we did psychometric profiles, amazingly, all those years ago, and it recommended certain categories of job, and I was at the top of that list was a canine trainer. They wanted me to be a dog walker. I like dogs, but not to that degree. But I think we all had dreams, at that stage of our lives. My dream was actually to be a film director. I love the idea of being in the creative world, but also not being in front of the camera, but being behind it, directing. And I guess to some degree, choreographing organizations is a bit like film directing. You have a script, you have a vision, you have an audience you're thinking of. And you bring those things to play. I didn't really have an exact plan, but I think what I did was sniffed out leads and opportunities and then went with my instincts. So even to this day, I read a lot, listen a lot, pick up what's going on, and I tend to make the approach. The initiative tends to come from me. So rather than being, I think a lot of people waiting for the phone to ring in the old-fashioned way. I've never done that. The phone does not ring, or it rings from the wrong people. So I've tended to always be proactive and take the lead. And I think enthusiasm often shines through. And I've always been quite high energy, and that tends to get me at the table. But I never had a plan as such, no. I think many people, what I love about actually the younger generation today is they tend to follow their heart more than their head to some degree. They're actually particularly in the last year or so, people are recalibrating and doing what they really want to do. I think most people die or certainly retire and have never found the it that they really wanted to be doing. They fell into things because of situations, opportunities maybe, the desire and need to pay the rent and make ends meet. And then they wake up one day, very late in life, and think, I'm not really enjoying this, and it's too late to do anything else, frankly, and they're on that treadmill. So I think bringing the heart to play in balance with the head, if you like, the art with the science to some degree, really important in making those career decisions.
Interesting, yeah, interesting indeed. So some spontaneity there, Andrew. And what would you describe as your leadership style? And perhaps if you could add to that, you know, how do you think leaders should lead during a pandemic?
My style has gone through lots of phases. It tends to, according to your environment and the context of what you're in. So in a startup, my biggest startup was the Business Design Centre, where I went into a building site in Islington in the middle of winter, through the construction work and out the other end to the opening. That was autocratic, very much leading from the front, quite directional, very firm. Appropriate then, because frankly, it was a sink or swim situation. If it hadn't succeeded, everything would have come tumbling down. So I had to make some tough decisions, and I guess made a few enemies in the process, which I regret. As businesses mature, and I matured, that style changed, and it became much more about a consensual style, listening to the room, taking into account the situation one is in, absorbing data and information, and then making a judgment. To me, the essence of leadership is thinking and putting yourself in the position of the followers, not the leader. If you lead too fast, without clarity and without a real commitment from those around you, you just leave them behind, and end up kind of doing everything yourself and losing people along the way. So I guess what I've learnt is if you can't take people with you, you've just got to stop and be a bit more patient, or maybe think this is the wrong move we're making. So it's a bit like, it's like having a mobile device with kind of 1,000 settings or notifications on it. Each one of them is telling you something different. And everyone on this planet are wonderful individuals. And there is no one size fits all approach. There are certain basics, clearly, which I stick to. You know, a few things, for example, around clarity. I think leaders tend to think very fast and jump to a conclusion, but around them, people can be slightly confused. They're not quite getting it. So being really clear is really important. It's a really simple and basic thing that I've made the mistake of. People thought, oh, we thought you meant this, Andrew, but I didn't. I meant that. So not being clear, really important. I think setting incredibly clear expectations and outcomes. You know, what are we trying to achieve here? How do we measure that? It can't be grey. It needs to be black and white. And it needs, I think, to have deadlines. I think I'm a very deadline-focused guy. For me, people that don't show up on time, sloppy and unprofessional. And it says a lot about people. It's simple. I look at silly little things. Like, I like people who are fast-moving, energetic, and quick thinkers. If you look at an organization at the rate that people move, how they get up from their desk, get out of a car, walk along corridors, slow movers, slow thinkers. I know that's a really basic kind of animal instinct thing to say, but you know, they're plodders. The accountants of our world and the lawyers, who I've got great regard for because they fulfill an incredibly important function, but they tend to be in that category, incredibly analytical, but they're not entrepreneurs. They're not the kind of people that we've got in the room today. So, yeah, and in terms of, do you want me to move on to what I call pandemic leadership?
Yes, please do.
Or I call it long leadership, because we are now, unfortunately, playing a long game. So the people I coach today and are coming to me right now are all interested in what's the appropriate style for the position we're in now. And most crisis leadership, as it's so often been called, was in response to a fairly short-term crisis. The shit hits the fan, we've got to get the hell out of here and save the ship, so to speak. Well, the trouble is that's occurring now, has been occurring every day for the last year and a quarter, and will continue to do so for a while yet. So there's a different mode. So my sort of 4 different tips for what I call long leadership are these. And they're all around protection. I believe we're all in survival mode. I know a lot of people, probably some of them listening now, are about creating growth and all that. But most people are about weathering the storm. They're about, let's ride this out and we'll live to fight another and hopefully a better day tomorrow. So the things I'm going to say now are around survival during a long term of stagnation. So there are 4 areas around protection. One is protect your company first. I know everyone's heart will go to their people. I'll come to that in a moment. But ultimately, if the company fails, we all fail. So your company has to come first, particularly around cash and debt. Obvious thing to say, but it's an absolute priority. Company protection, number 1. The second thing I would add into the mix is protect your people. And that's about really listening, really being sensitive to people's situation, huge patience and great flexibility. So protection of people, very, very, very important. And I'd rank that second. The third is about protecting customers. And that isn't just about money. A lot of people, frankly, have been using this current situation to cry help around costs of any kind, whether it's rent from landlords or the price of your product or service. Some have used that. I have to be honest, there's no question they've used that situation. When you look at their position in more forensic depth, they didn't need that help. A lot of companies cried furlough, and as you know, gave the money back later because their conscience got the better of them. So it's not always about money with customers. Transparency is really important, being absolutely open. Great communications, but not over communicating. Some companies are just hitting us with too much stuff and we're not reading it. So selective, well-written, cleverly crafted comms where appropriate. And clearly humor in there if appropriate too. The need to laugh amongst all this is really critical. Over delivery, I think, is really important with protecting customers. So what you used to do 100% of, you need to do 110% of. And those little things will count later in customer loyalty. And the final bit of protection around what I call the survival mode is protecting yourself. The stress and the strain of all this is huge. Most of us, particularly in leadership roles, put on a brave face. But you need to work out how to maintain both your physical and your mental health of equal balance and importance. Whatever that might be. It might be yoga, meditation, running, whatever it might be. But ultimately, if you fall over, so do the other 3. Customers, people, and your company itself. And that needs to be daily. I think the fear, when people are in a frightened situation, as so many have been and are, we need people to comfort us. And yet, in many cases, most cases, we've been isolated from the comfort of our fellow man and woman. And that's really tough. That's why we have a mental health crisis now and emerging. So you need to work out for yourself, what do I need right now to maintain my stability and my sanity? So they're my 4 really key things that I'm constantly talking to people on a daily basis about when they're reaching out for support during this very tough time around an appropriate style of leadership.
Thank you, Andrew. What would you say was your toughest leadership challenge, and alongside that, your biggest mistake?
Hmm. Well, of course, we learn little or nothing from our successes. We bank it and we move on. It's only from our setbacks that we really learn. And I've had many, no different to any of you lot. I think my toughest challenge, rather than looking at a specific one-off example, of which there's countless, was fun enough, Harry, when you and I met, I think the academy, where I was leading, it was a franchise model, bless you, franchise model. And in a franchise, I think the model's great. I really believe in it. But you're dealing with owners of their businesses, of micro businesses. And the confusion between the dynamic between who's the customer and who's the supplier is really weird. Because you're the customer, you were buying a franchise from me at the time when we very first met. And yet I'm telling you a load of things to do. I've been quite dictatorial about how our business practice works. And that's pretty odd, because most of us that supply customers don't do that. So really weird customer supplier service contract in inverted commas, and dealing with a bunch of people who had made it in their own business lifetimes and now wanted to be their own bosses and take back control. So very single-minded bunch of people who all knew better than me. And I had, I don't know, 35, 40 franchises at the end when I sold the business and moved away. Very hard conversations. You were actually a darling, I have to be honest. You were always charm personified, and I thank you for that. But you will have seen meetings, the dynamic was tense. And so without, I mean, the larger organizations that I'd run, I mean, Earls Court Olympia was turning over 90 million. I had 750 people, NEC 150, 1,250 people. A doddle by comparison. Why? Because in a large organization, you have the luxury and the comfort of fantastic resource and infrastructure and support. Essentially, you're running the business through an exec team of 4, 5, 6 people. Look after them, you've got a great machine that will turn out growth and profit. So not that difficult. I found the larger organizations, I mean, you can remove the politics and all that bollocks, you know, really easy. The smaller entrepreneurial setup, much tougher, because everyone knows better. And everyone really is working in an atmosphere, I think, of a certain degree of survival, risk and fear. They're as good as this month's business. So the insecurity breeds attention. So that required a very different style from me. And I have to be honest, do I think I mastered it? No, I don't. I think I did sometimes. I built the organization, we sold it, and I think it ultimately was a good brand that was respected. But the individual relationships were very tough. And I used to, at the end of the day, I was pretty knackered through some of those entanglements. I think you asked me about my biggest mistake. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Goodness. I think when I'm looking at a goal, a real target, and basically these were exits. These were businesses where, particularly when you're private equity backed, as I was at Earls Court Olympia, when you buy the company, you're for sale the next day. That's the way it works. So, and you're really concerned about IRR, internal rate of return, because as the clock ticks, that gets weakened all the time. And I was very well aware there that the time horizon in those days was about a 4 to 5 year exit model. That was the expectation. And so come the sort of 3rd/4th year, you're starting to look, how am I going to move this on and give everyone a decent return for their investment? And I was really had my absolute eye on that prize. And I think in my obsession to do that, I lost sight of some relationships. And one particular one of my co-directors, I had an amazing bunch of people around me. The five of us were really kind of the famous five. We were a really strong, bonded team. But as we led up to that exit, one of my team, and I won't name him, had really tough personal problems. His wife was extremely ill with a pregnancy, almost died. And he had lost his brother had committed suicide in Australia. This all happened within a matter of months. He was distant from him, but nevertheless, his brother. And then he personally had a collapsed lung, possibly due to the stress of all this, and was whisked to hospital. Now, I spoke to him and I went to see him in hospital, but was I as caring, if you like, as loving? I'd known this guy a long time. I brought him with me to the business. No. And when we did the deal and we went out for our celebration dinner, as you do, I just noticed in the plaudits, he was silent. And about a month afterwards, I'd stayed on as chairman for a short time in the transition. I said to him, let's have a sit down and what's going on? You and I have been really close. And he let loose. And he said, you weren't there for me, Andrew. I was dying, literally dying, clinging on. And all you were concerned was get this deal across the line, make everyone a pile of dough, and happy days. Now, he got the pile of dough. But what did he remember? I wasn't there for him as a leader. And funnily enough, a lot of, it leads me on to another point, if I can make it here. A lot of companies pride themselves, particularly the bigger, more institutionalized organizations with huge or lack of staff turnover. We've got 95% retention. And I say to them, so you've only got 5% new blood a year. I don't think high staff retention is to be gloated over. I think it needs to be high, but not too high. Too little, and there's instability. Too great, and there's no fresh thinking. And one thing you need to learn, talk about mistakes, is when people leave you, particularly people that left you because they took the initiative, not you. They weren't dismissed. They moved on to some other thing, but you felt a loss. And people do exit interviews, but they're rubbish. They're a box ticking exercise. And I think you wait a short space of time, a month or two, maybe, the dust has settled and things are less raw. And then you pick up phone and go for a drink, which is what I did with this guy. They'll tell you loads about you, your leadership style, and the company they've left, which is rich because it's utterly objective. It's got no tinge of ambition or political positioning to it. And so, and I don't call it an exit, don't call it anything. It's let's have a drink. And why did you leave? What could we have done to have kept you? Rich information, which you'll never get from anybody else. So my mistakes tend to be around what I said earlier, is putting the company before people. I still think, frankly, that's important, but I have occasionally forgotten the people along the way.
Okay, understood. I mean, relevant to that, I suppose, Andrew, I think your business strapline has been quoted as take business seriously, but not yourself. What exactly do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? Being absolutely professional in your business activities. Your reputation is your brand. It stays with you everywhere, particularly today through social media. Never leaves you. But a tinge of bad press is hugely damaging. So constantly thinking about yourself not as a company, but as your personal brand, really important. So every encounter that you make, every conversation you have, every email you don't reply to, damages that brand. So being really professional in every regard within your business conduct, important, pretty intense around that. But when you leave the office and you come home, you know, I said to my mom, I still take the wheelie bins out. You know, you're just another, and I think as you achieve success in your career, in your business, and you get quite a lot of celebrity status, as I've managed to enjoy here and there, a lot of media attention, you can become a bit of an arsehole. And I certainly did. And it's often called out. I remember my brother, Gerald, we used to, when my dad was alive, you know, always have Friday night dinners. And there was some conversation I overheard. I heard Gerald saying, "Oh, Andrew hasn't been normal for years." And it really woke me up, thinking, what does that mean? It's because I've become an arsehole. My daughter, Amy, my eldest daughter, was doing work experience with me. In the car coming home, I said, "How'd it go?" And she said, "It was fine. It was really interesting, Dad, but why have you got that weird voice?" And what she meant was, I wasn't being absolutely the dad that she knew in my work life. So I think don't take yourself seriously means about keeping your authenticity. Just be who you are. You know, we spend the majority of our lives at work. So if you're bending yourself out of shape to create some kind of image that isn't real, the stress on you is huge. And also, don't kid yourself that people don't read that. Everyone sees it. You meet people and you think you're not the genuine article, you're not authentic. We know that, don't we? Almost immediately when we meet folks. And so I just try and just stay grounded. You're still enough, whatever you might achieve. I remember Tony Blair was a bit of a hero figure to me. I met him a few times. We did a couple of things with him. And one of the things that I managed to orchestrate was a big reception for the people I was involved in this particular project at Downing Street, which he conceded to. I didn't want any money. I just said, please, the people that helped bring this home, entertain them at Downing Street and be there. And he did, kept his word. And my mum was there, who was pretty ailing then. And after all the speeches and rubbish, I said, come and meet my mum. And he said, sure. And he comes over, and her name was Golda. And he said, oh, delighted to meet you, Golda. I've heard a great deal about you, bollocks. And I want you to put his arm around me and says, and we've got great plans for Andrew, bollocks. And I thought, that's just utter rubbish. I have no political ambitions. Don't think I ever saw him again. We met one more time. And you know, that's not being real. It's just rubbish. So I've learned a few lessons, sometimes from my heroes, who brought me down to earth. And that's about not taking myself seriously. Long answer, Harry, sorry.
Don't worry, don't worry, Andrew. One final question before we open it up to everybody else to ask you some questions. Do you think that leaders, entrepreneurs, leaders, however you want to style them, are born or made?
It's a great question. Well, the data tells us, there's so many surveys done on this, you believe them, 10% are born leaders. You can see them at school. Maybe the bossy one, or the one that people crowd around at sports things. 10% hopeless, wasting our time, don't even try. But the good news is 80% of us may not be born, but have the ability to learn and train and be competent, let's put it that way. You don't always have to be a shining leader, full of charisma and charm and inspiration. You just need to be effective at what role you're in. And a lot of the work I have done when I actually met you with the Academy and subsequently is around taking people who are rather shy, retiring, lacking in confidence, and giving them the tools to be competent leaders, effective at what they were doing. And often attracting people that, you know, attracted to that sort. And some of the old rules, some that I had in older books on the subject, talk about, you know, leaders becoming, you know, when you talk about leadership, you think of Churchill and people that are great, you know, think of Obama, great communicators, great speech makers. But, you know, I met a couple of people spring to mind that were awful speech makers. I had Sir Terence Conran, who recently died, you know, who led the design renaissance in this country over decades. Open design event of mine, way back. And he got on the podium. He was useless. He had no speech prepared. He wasn't clear. Hopeless speech maker. And the other, but he was great on a one-to-one. He was fantastic, but not on a podium. In the same kind of vein of a poor communicator is Richard Branson. He's great individually, but don't put him on a stage to speak. Don't have him at a conference. He's very in his head, as often great people are, but he's not a good communicator publicly. When you hear him interviewed, he gets by with charisma and that grinning smile of his, but he's not good at holding an audience. And so some of the old so-called tools of leadership aren't necessarily appropriate today. And indeed, when so much has been online now, you ask the question, do you need to be a good communicator in the written word? Sorry, in the spoken word. More important in the written word, actually. So leadership that is appropriate for your particular business and particular situation is trainable. And I think that's great news for most people. But there are some people that I've come across that had aspirations, and I had to use tough love and say, you're not going to get that number one position. You're great number two. You're a great consigliere, the support act, but not the leading act. And you think, well, that's quite cruel. But also, I believe in being straight and taking people out of their misery and set them a new horizon to follow, not an unrealistic one that's bound to disappoint.
Thank you, Andrew. And I know that now I know you still do many interesting things, but you do spend a lot of time helping young leaders, new leaders, and emerging companies. And so we've got a distinguished group on the call today. And I think I'm going to open up the floor to people to ask you questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
Who would like to start? I've got a few. I've got Angela first, and I think then you, Gary, and others too. Off you go, Angela.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. It was really very useful and interesting. A lot of what you said resonated, particularly when you were talking about, you know, not having maybe the patience that you would have liked with slow movers, plodders or whatever, but particularly when you gave the example of achieving the business goal, but maybe not being there for your friend and colleague. Looking back at that, how would you do that differently if you could do it again? Because, you know, is it a question of one or the other, or would you somehow have managed to achieve both?
You know what? That's a great question, Angela. I asked myself that a long time. I still, to this day, we met up, but it's not the same. There's a scar. What I would have said to him, with the benefit of hindsight, in that situation was something like, look, I'm really heads down on getting this business sold at the best price to good buyers. That's what I was put here to do. And if during that process I neglect you and your personal circumstance, I'm sorry. My first responsibility is to the investors. And if I'm not here for you during that, I'm really sorry. We'll have a drink and we'll kiss and make up later. But can you understand that? And I probably should have said it actually to the whole team, because although he voiced to me very honestly how bad he thought I'd acted, others may have felt the same way but weren't so forthcoming. So being vulnerable, I was quite, he was very vulnerable, but so was I. Vulnerable and transparency is really good, again, if it's authentic. So I really just should have spoken out, I guess, Andrew, and said, sometimes, we do neglect people in the desire to get things done, but, understand that. And he probably would have cut me a bit more slack.
Because you can't be everything to everybody.
You can't. And yeah, that's probably, I look, I still had to get this deal done.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to lose people along the way. I just should have been open. And so my mind is on other things. I'm utterly focused. Please bear with me.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Gary, then I think Dave and Ruben, but Gary, over to you.
Yep. Hi, Andrew. Thanks. That was really good. I always try and get a question from what I've learned today. And when you were speaking about mindfulness, I just want to relate this to startups. And do you see salary or pay as part of that mindfulness problem? And I say this because most startups, when they get investment, they normally go, I'm going to take a lesser salary. I'm going to take all them hits, even though 9 out of 10 companies never go on to be successful. So what's your opinion around salary and startups?
Okay. Been involved in one of those literally just a few days ago. Guy coming from a very well-paid corporate background in the financial world into a young startup where he's going to have to take a massive hit on his comp, but for a decent slug of equity in hope tomorrow as we grow the business. And he's really struggling with it. And, there's a certain self-esteem and prestige around it. If I'm paid X, if I'm paid 100, and I have been for the last few years, and someone offers me 60 with a bit of jam tomorrow, it's really hard to get your head around, isn't it? So I have to say this conversation hasn't yet panned out. But I think the key to it is understand what you're coming into. If you can't survive in terms of your current commitments on a lower guaranteed wage, so to speak, that's going to find that insecurity is going to affect your performance. And ultimately it won't work. After a short space of time, you're going to have to cut and run. And everyone, as a consequence, suffers that pain. So I think the big question, and with this particular guy, I've said to him, can you survive on 60% of what you're earning for the next 3 years? Is that going to keep the wolves from the door? And he said, yeah, I can. There'll be certain luxuries I'll have to cut. Won't be able to go on those holidays anymore and stuff like that. But yeah, so I said, right, if you love the culture, and ultimately, most people leave companies because they hate the culture. They hate the way things are done and the people they're working with. If you love the culture and the people and the purpose of the organization at its core, you'll stay the distance and you'll be successful. So let that drive your decision. But if you can't withstand that wage cut, you can't go, because ultimately it'll give you sleepless nights and it won't work out.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's what I think goes to the mindfulness of, I don't think people talk about money when they talk about mindfulness and people coping with stress. That's all. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and the data on why people join organizations, particularly why they stay. Money, 5th. The other 4, culture, motivation, love the team, love the purpose. All that stuff comes well before money. It's down the ranking. It's not up the top.
Yeah.
And that's actually where you guys can really succeed, because you will create great cultures for the people that are with you, whereas those other people that are, you know, in bigger worlds, been around longer, unfortunately lose sight of it.
Exactly.
Thank you. Dave Plunkett.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Thanks, Andrew. That was great. I've got 2 questions. First was a very quick one, and I thought it when you were on a previous stand-up call. What is that image behind you? It looks like it's something really quite cool and interesting, and it's going to bug me if I don't know, because we can only see a bit of it.
It's a very big picture, as you can see. It's because we're close in, you can't see it, Dave. It's people, but it's quite fragmented. It's quite pixelated. You need to stand back from it. But one of the things I've had the pleasure of doing is collecting contemporary art. I set up in Islington the London Art Fair, which you may or may not know, mostly young emerging artists in those days. Now they're rich and successful. And so I had the pleasure of seeing a lot of art and collecting it here and there. And that's a piece I picked up along the way.
Very nice, cool.
Okay.
So my actual question, that's more business.
You're more interested in my background than me. I get that.
Well, you can tell from the various stuff I have around my office. I like things, so I'm interested in others' things.
Okay.
On the business side, then, the thing I really picked up on was you mentioned about learning more from our failures than our successes, which I do absolutely agree on. The mistakes I've made or witnessed are where I've had by far my biggest learnings. But I'm wondering on your thoughts on successes and on taking time to review them and see what went well, because it's something that I've not done enough of, and I'm sure lots of us don't, because you, as you say, you kind of just, right, that's happened, and you just move on, and so yeah, just wondering your thoughts on whether we should all take a little bit more time to actually see what we've done right.
Good question. I mean, quick story there. When I sold Earl's Court and Olympia, we all made a lot of money. First time in our lives. So, you know, money that was keep us secure forever. I went away to celebrate. Someone said, you've got to celebrate. So I went to Miami. It was in May, laid on the beach, a bit bored. And when I've missed it, there was an ad in the Sunday Times that weekend. Chief executive of the NEC, I'd missed it because I was away. Wasn't digital then. But the guy from Candover, who was the private equity company that supported me, he popped it in the post to me and said, did you see this? And I hadn't seen it. Weirdly, the massive legal agreement when I left the company covered non-compete only for London. They were naive about the way the exhibition industry worked, the events industry worked, and they thought it was geographic. Of course, it's national. It's international. So I couldn't get a job, I don't know, at Excel for 3 years in London, down in the East End, but I could go 100 miles up the motorway to the NEC and start on the Monday, which is what I did. And when I went up there, one of my customers, a guy called Tim Parsons, who was a pop promoter, was my client, and he'd sold his company just before me. And I had a dinner with him up in Birmingham because he was a Brummie. And he said, what have you done to celebrate? And I said, I went to Miami for the weekend. It was just a weekend. So he said, that's ridiculous. Go and do something that's about you. And I did. I bought myself a big car or something. But I have to be honest, it meant nothing. I love the journey. I love the achievement of getting there. But the arrival ain't so great. I find buying things, being acquisitive, is enriching. Selling things is impoverishing. It fills up your bank account as a sort of temporary fix, but it didn't nourish me at all. To me, it's a sense of loss, actually. So to answer your question, I do think celebrating successes is important. I find it slightly embarrassing. Maybe it's a British thing, I don't know. But you know, who do I really accept an honest compliment from? My wife. And when he was alive, my dad, who never gave me one. But I find it quite embarrassing, people saying, good job. I find, paradoxically, praise in the workplace, authentically done and spontaneously delivered, rich. It's incredible. And I'm sure you all do it well and appropriately. But receiving it, I find very awkward. I need a therapist to explain that why. I don't know. So not great at celebrating successes or learning from successes. I don't think, and also just a quick PS to that, revisiting old stuff that worked then doesn't work again. When I've gone back, I won't say to the scene of the crime, to the scene of the success, people that worked with me said, come and join me now and let's do it again. No good. Timing, everything. It's where you were at a particular moment in time. And my impatience has often made that I got my timing wrong. So when I went to the NEC, I went there because I wanted to privatize it. It says in the press release, yeah, as Harry says, from council to commercial. But the new chairman, Roger, says to me, he was a company from a private equity background. He said, this thing should not be owned by Birmingham City Council. 6 months in, I had no patience to my role. I made my first, I won't say bid, I lifted the lid on that. There was an explosion in the council because it was seen as a political hobby horse. It was something they used to open big fairs on and have royalty come to, and the motor show and all that kind of stuff. And to them, it was a political beast, not a commercial one. And I had a massive fallout with the leader of Birmingham City Council, Mike Whitby. And it was on a Friday. I never driving down the motorway, fuming. And Roger, the chairman, lovely guy, phones me up and says, please don't leave. I know he was an idiot, but also you're an idiot because you shouldn't have opened your big mouth. It was too soon. Now, I left a few years later. It's now, as you probably know, it's private today. It's been sold twice. Now owned by Blackstone. So timing everything. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Personal.
Ruby, you got a question there?
Yeah, I do. Great hearing you, Andrew. And I think there's one part in particular that you mentioned that really resonated with me, which is the survival, fear, and risk. I think especially nowadays, I wouldn't say it's on the lips, but it's definitely on the mind of a lot of business owners that I'm currently speaking to, and hopefully will be speaking to, and I think it will be the same for a bit of a time to come. But my question is based more around yourself. Clearly, you're a very successful business person. What was it that you did to challenge yourself on a daily basis, and do you still continue to do that today?
Did you say change or challenge?
Challenge.
Challenge. Okay. It's back to learning and development, actually, what you don't know. I was a really poor student at school, really poor. I hated it. But late in life, you've got the luxury of learning what you want to learn. I could be selective. So I was very fortunate in my early 30s. I went to Harvard Business School. Proper education, really intense, very challenging, well out of my comfort zone. And suddenly I got a lust for learning. But I wanted to be the decider of what I wanted to learn, whatever it might be. So the things that challenge me is thinking, I can't do that, but he or she can. And I thought, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. So I find learning stuff that is really edgy, tough. So for example, way back, before we were all keyboard literate, I thought, I've got to learn to touch type. Can't do this one finger stuff, that's ridiculous. So I touch typed today, and this was a long time ago. I went to a speaker academy, back to our conversations, because I knew in my roles I was playing, I'd have to be able to speak on a platform publicly and not make an idiot of myself. And I learned how to speak experientially. The best learning is not textbook. It's being in the room, doing it by experience. It was scary stuff, that speaker stuff. Spontaneous stuff, called upon in a big room of people to speak spontaneously for 2 minutes on a subject you were given, for example. And I had the time to get up from my seat and walk to the end of the room to gather my thoughts and say something coherent. I went and did a course at the London School of Journalism on writing skills, because I wanted to be able to write really well, because I thought it was a really important medium. So stretchy learning is how I challenge myself. Doing the stuff that I think I need to know or are just fascinated to learn. I did a thing on it just before lockdown. I was rubbish at Excel spreadsheets. Everyone else around me seemed to be great at them. I went and did a course on it because I needed to know. So pushing myself to learn stuff that isn't easy for me is the way I challenge it. It's not in business and all that stuff today. I find that I have to be, without sounding, I guess, a bit complacent, I don't find that difficult when you break things down. But building my own knowledge, hard, doing stuff. And also sometimes giving up. Be honest, giving up. I'm a shit skier. I've always wanted to be the best at sport. My family are much better skiers than me. And about 2 years ago, I had a bad accident. I said to my wife, I'm done with this. It hurts too much. And so I gave it up. So occasionally, I guess, throwing in the towel, doing something else.
Thank you.
Harry, I think it's in front of me. It's Mark and Julian.
Okay.
Julian.
Sorry, I lost message for a while then. Sorry. So, okay, Mark, off you go, and then Julian.
Andrew, thank you very much. Found all of that very fascinating, great insight, and loved all your experience. Got a very quick question for you. You mentioned at the outset that you're now doing coaching for people. There are an awful lot of coaches out there. In your view, what makes a great coach?
50% skill, 50% fit. In what I call the casting session, which is when you meet and just have a chat and try and tease out what's going on. If the chemistry isn't right, and you will know that within an hour, often within minutes, move on and find somebody else. So first of all, chemistry, dynamics, you got to like the person and like being with them, because coaching is quite intense. You're in the room for an hour or two quite regularly, and if you're finding it torture, don't do that. The second issue is there's some core competences of the coach, which in my case, I've done a certain degree of personal training, NLP and others. Most of it's on the job. It's a bit like when I think you get when you can fly a helicopter or a plane. It's flying time, hours in the air, and you need to be with people that have done those hours. Sadly, the only way to detect that is on fees. Coaches' fees vary massively, from 100 to 150 or 250 to £1,000, sometimes more. And if they're in the higher level, they have the confidence to have built a reputation that demands that. And the ones down that ladder have not. But coaches ultimately, to answer more directly, coaches have the ability to ask the right question. And in that casting session, if they hit you with a lot of right questions, and the way they detect that is your reaction is not spontaneous, it's looking into the own thinking, as the cogs tend to turn and think, So chemistry and asking great questions pertinent to you and your situation is probably the way in which I would suggest you find the right coach. And also, by the way, in terms of back to self-development, coaches need to be coached. So in my case, I was getting a bit, I know rusty, I wanted some new tricks. And one of my clients says, so-and-so is the most amazing coach I've ever been. I can't afford him anymore, he said. That's why he came to me, maybe. And I suck him out, and I did sessions with him. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there seems to be a bit of a misnomer out there about the role of a coach and the role of a mentor. You know, they
should have
tend to get blurred a little bit.
I should have actually mentioned that. Thank you. I'm much more of a mentor than a coach. A coach is more like a therapist, sits back, listens, plays with their metaphorical beard, and gets you to the answers. It's a long and patient journey. I'm not that person. I am occasionally, but I'm mostly mentoring. I'm call on my experience to say, hear what's going on, absorb the data, understand the context, and say, look, this is my take.
Yeah.
And then when you've made a judgment as to the course of action you're going to take, I hold you to account at the next session.
Yeah.
And I have fired more than one client because repeatedly they never followed through. And I say, I'm not here, this is not a social meeting. Nice to have a cup of coffee with you, but this is about getting stuff done. And more than once, after 3 or 4 times, they didn't do stuff that we'd agreed to. That was our kind of commitment. That was our contract. There was no point. We're not here for a chat. We had to make things better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, the context for me asking the question is I did a diploma in executive coaching last year, and I came out of it feeling decidedly underwhelmed because it didn't pick up the balance of what I called the mentoring element and using my experience. So that answer was brilliant. It sort of addressed the issues I have in my head right now.
People that haven't got the experience or the flying time or the track record are coaches. People that have are mentors.
Yeah. I agree. Thank you.
Good distinction, Andrew, I think. Yeah. Julian, over to you.
Thanks, Harry. Andrew, really thank you for the last half an hour. Really enjoyed that. So I'm a co-founder of a young startup, and we feel very much that people are everything. So the co-founders, the people that we're onboarding, and we're going to be onboarding up to 5 staff in the coming months. The factors that I specifically really look for in individuals is creativity, entrepreneurship, so being a self-starter, and also their ability to learn quickly rather than what they've learned already. It's really, quite a lot of those factors quite difficult to measure. So in your past, like, what have you looked for in those 45 minutes in those interviews to attract yourself to a specific candidate rather than another?
So thanks, Julian. I think talent management is really important. It's really important. I think, again, back to Mark's question around coaching, I think chemistry is vital. In the first minutes of an encounter, as you sit down, I think you kind of know. And to my regret, occasionally, once or twice, and I won't do this again, particularly not in today's climate, I've sat down with folks, and minutes in, I thought, I'm going to spend an hour of my time now. I know they're not right. We're not right for you, and they're not right for us. And once or twice, I've said, we can go through the hour, and I can ask you all the right questions, but I know we're not going to make hay together. And they didn't thank me for that. They were very angry. but generally speaking, you know very fast. You can read people very fast, animal instincts. So about chemistry, really important. And are they going to be happy in the culture with the people and the way we do things? And your line of questioning, Julian, should revolve primarily around that. You can teach skills, you can, but you can't teach culture. It's in the DNA. It's nurture and nature. It's inbred when they come to see you. And if they're not going to be happy in your environment, then 6 months' time, they're going to go. The other thing, talking about 6 months, most people within 6 months, well within, know they've made a mistake. They hang on to them for a further year, and 18 months goes by and then they go. The cost of wrong hiring is massive. It's never been actually measured or calibrated, but it's huge. Big blow to the confidence. You personally feel you failed. But the ability to hire well, I've read lots of books on it. I used to use a script. I don't anymore. I really get into knowing who is that person sitting in front of me and asking them really tough questions. Really, really tough questions, which can be quite deep and personal. And if they're resistant to that, it creates a certain degree of suspicion. If they embrace it, I lean in. And so the skill stuff, I would leave out the room. Their CV would have dealt with that. They're probably in front of you because they tick those boxes. But you focus entirely on that person and delve deep, and be quite penetrating. That will get you to the heart of the person, ideally. And this whole, unfortunately, hiring today has become a massive science. I think it's more of an art. And this whole protocol around hiring, dozens of bloody meetings and tests and group sessions and all that. You will know if you've done your job well and you're a good reader of people. In one session, you'll know. I'm not saying you should hire them, by the way, but you know if you've got a good candidate that's worthy of follow-up.
Talking just a follow-up, talking about the going down the pub and having a beer for an exit interview. That just removes all those barriers, because I felt when I was interviewing, when I was still a consultant, that nerves would sometimes get the better of me and I wouldn't be able to actually show my true self. So is there a way of doing DD separate from the actual interview process? Would you recommend, for example, I'm not a fan of the reference process, but
okay, let me tell you a great way. Yes, thank you for that. One thing I did, and I've passed on a lot, to check people out in a different environment, but also to do that culture check bit and values check bit. Remind me to talk about values before we finish. I brought them home to dinner with my family. I said, come around for dinner. Now, my wife's amazing at reading people, better than I am. And I have to be honest, I think women are generally. That doesn't sound sexist against our male species, but they are. But I wanted to see how relaxed they were in that kind of environment, because I've always run a family culture, whether it's a large or small business. It's a family culture. And if they felt very awkward, they weren't a good hire. If they relaxed into it, a few bottles of wine and a different environment, my kids running around maybe or not before they went off to bed, all that stuff, brilliant, as the follow-up. I wouldn't necessarily do it as meeting 2, it's probably meeting 3. It's before you're ready to get onto T's and C's. But that was a good take. Just one last thing on values. We all talk about how values are so important, don't we? But I think I'm the only person I've ever seen who's got values on my CV. They're there at the bottom. No one, you look at LinkedIn or any bio or any CV, no one puts values out there. Why? We think they're bloody important. We'll talk about our education or our Oxford degree, but cutting someone open saying this is who I am, which values try to do, not there. And when I ask people often at those meetings when I've delved deep, as I said, So how would you describe your values? They stumble. And that worries me. That really worries me. Is that helpful?
Yeah, really helpful. Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Andrew? We've been moving on a bit now, but some very good questions and some very good responses for Andrew. Before we let him go, any last questions?
No, but I thought that was amazing. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been great.
Thank you.
It's been great to have you with us, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Okay, have a good meeting.
Well, very insightful, and very, very useful and enjoyable as well.